I would like to introduce Dr. Gershon Baskin to you. Psst. Gershon was born in the USA and came to Israel as a young man. He was the founder and co-director of IPCRI. I mentioned the NGO earlier on. And Gershon played a key role in getting Gilad Shalit after how many? 5 years?
5 years and 4 months.
5 years and 4 months out of Hamas captivity. He played a key role in getting him free. I dedicated a chapter, a text in my Gaza book, Gershon and his connections to Hamas. And let me just quote in German a few sentences. Überschrift: Warum brach ein langjähriger inoffizieller Kontakt zwischen einem Israeli und einem Hamas-Vertreter ab? Und der Text endet so, nachdem Gershon diesen Razi Hamad im libanesischen Fernsehen bei einem Interview gesehen hatte, brach Gershon den Kontakt ab, nachdem Hamad gesagt hatte, er rechtfertige den Terrorangriff vom 7. Oktober und, Zitat, versprach einige mehr bis zur Auslöschung Israels. Ende des Zitats. Andern Tags schrieb Baskin Razi Hamad nochmals. Baskin brach den Kontakt ab. Zitat: Nach mehr als 17 Jahren Kontakt ist der Mann, den ich kannte, nicht derselbe, der nun sein Volk in Gaza im Stich gelassen hat und im Krieg offizieller Sprecher der Hamas ist. Ende des Zitats. Gershon hat mir vor einer Minute gesagt, Sie sind wieder in Kontakt und vielleicht wird er auch darüber ein wenig sprechen. Gershon is an expert of the Israeli peace camp. He's a peace activist himself, and I'm looking forward to your words. The floor is yours, Gershon.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank the organizers for inviting me. I'll start with a confession. I'm not an anti-Semite. Nor am I a self-hating Jew. I mention this because when it was known in the world that I was going to be appearing with Francesca, I was attacked of legitimizing anti-Semitism, which of course I don't. Anti-Semitism is illegitimate always, everywhere. Criticism of Israel and what Israel does is completely legitimate, always. There are some people who criticize Israel who are also anti-Semites, but most criticism of Israel is in the right place and needs to be said and needs to be acted on. There's very little of what Francesca said that I take issue with. I agree with almost everything that she said. Almost, here and there, a little piece. Nothing very important. But I'm not going to speak in the same direction that she did because unfortunately, perhaps like her, perhaps unlike her, I have zero confidence in international law and international institutions and the ability to make change based on doing the right thing. It is 100% true that if the international community acted on the basis of international law and the institutions of international law had the power to enforce the decisions they make, our reality would be very different. But that's not the case. We have seen repeatedly Security Council resolutions voted 14-1, with the one vetoing them. We've even seen Security Council resolutions that pass and nothing happens, let alone resolutions of the General Assembly or other institutions of international law, the ICJ. maybe the ICC finally will be able to enforce warrants for the arrest of some of the people that they are putting those warrants out for. We're also seeing national law take hold in different countries in the world, trying to arrest Israelis who are accused of committing war crimes in Gaza, and we'll see how that plays out. But I believe very firmly, from my personal experience and from the reality that we live in Israel and Palestine, that if there's going to be a resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that will enable Israelis and Palestinians to live in peace with each other, it's going to come from within Israel and Palestine and in the region, and not in Brussels or New York or Geneva or anyone else around the world. It is our conflict, it is our responsibility to ensure that this war in Gaza is the last Israeli-Palestinian war. We cannot continue to do this. We've been killing each other for more than 100 years, and if there's anything that we need to learn from the past horrible 15 months, is that we can't keep doing it. When I got invited, I asked the organizers of this conference to bring with me my Palestinian colleague, who we often work together on a daily basis and share stages, both in Israel and in Palestine and around the world, Samis and Jalawi. Unfortunately, there wasn't a possibility of doing that, so I'm going to take the liberty to some of my words speak in his words as well, as we share so much in common in our beliefs of what we're doing and what needs to be done. We start by saying that we have crossed moral red lines in this war that should never be crossed. On October 7th, Hamas committed war crimes, crimes against humanity that should never be done by anyone. And every day since October 7th, Israel has been committing war crimes and crimes against humanity in Gaza. We have taken the liberty to cross moral red lines that no human being and no people should be allowed to do, and it should not be tolerated. And there's no mincing the words here about the crimes that have been committed since October 7th by Hamas and since that day by Israel in Gaza. There's no question about the war crimes that have been committed, and the people who commit them need to be held responsible for those crimes that were committed. We need to recognize, if we're going to confront our reality and try to think about where we go, that for Jews around the world and for Israelis, October 7th was the worst trauma since the Holocaust. And it is a trauma that we have not yet left. Israelis are not living today on February 15th. Israelis say that they are in October 498. That's the date that we live in. Israelis have not left October 7th. We are reminded of it every single day in our media, in radio and television, in the print, in conversations between people. And since October 7th, the Palestinians are living, in my view, a bigger trauma than the Nakba. For Palestinians, what they have experienced in Gaza and in the West Bank, and I think it's pertinent for Palestinians, not only in Palestine, but for Palestinians that I meet all over the world, they are living through a trauma which is worse than 1948. And it affects our ability to think rationally and coherently, and to think about a positive direction that we can move in after the horrors that we've lived through. We aren't yet post-traumatic, these two people. We are still living the trauma every single day, and the trauma will continue to be with us. We won't begin to become post-traumatic until this war is over. And here's a few unfortunate realities. The war will not end as long as there remain Israeli hostages in Gaza. There are still 73 Israeli hostages in Gaza. The war will not end as long as Hamas is in control of Gaza. The war will probably not end as long as Benjamin Netanyahu is Prime Minister of Israel. The war will probably not end as long as Mahmoud Abbas is the president of the Palestinian Authority. The war may not end as long as Donald Trump is president of the United States. Now, these are all realities that could change. Hamas is changing. There are conversations amongst the Hamas leaders outside of Gaza on taking a new direction. These are serious talks. I can't give you any projections or any knowledge of what decisions that they are going to make, but they are 100% aware that as long as Hamas controls Gaza, not a dollar will enter Gaza for reconstruction. This the Hamas leadership recognizes. They know it. The thing is that at least since the beginning of the ceasefire, which was an agreement between Israel and Hamas, the same Hamas that Israel said they're going to destroy, the ceasefire agreement was between Israel and Hamas. A third-tier level of Hamas commanders have risen from the rubble and the dust and the tunnels and have taken command of Gaza. With $200, they can give out uniforms and guns to 16 and 17-year-olds who are part of the daily struggle of survival, people who are searching for food and water and shelter and have none of those, are easily recruited into the Hamas on the ground. And there is a division, a very worrying division developing between the Hamas leadership outside and the new young leadership of Hamas inside. None of the political leadership of Hamas that we knew before are in Gaza today. They're all either dead or outside of Gaza. And the military commanders, most of them are no longer alive either. There's a group of 3 or 4 people who were mid-level commanders before October 7th who are now running the show in Gaza. And because there is no alternative to Gaza, to Hamas in Gaza, the people of Gaza don't rise against Hamas. What everyone tells me, Gazans and Palestinians not from Gaza, is that Hamas is very unpopular in Gaza today. The people of Gaza don't want Hamas in power anymore. When I had a conversation with a good friend of mine in Gaza just 2 weeks ago of why aren't people rising up against Hamas if they're so against Hamas, they said, what's the alternative? Hamas executed people in the streets after the ceasefire was declared, shot others in their knees, to spread the message that you're not going to go against us, we're in power. And we've seen these shows that they put on the days of the exchanges of hostages when they released just this morning. It's a well-orchestrated show of power, of force, of people who mean business. Our leaders in Israel, the Palestinian leadership, and the Arab countries have ideas on the day after. No one is willing to discuss them seriously, certainly not the Israelis. Netanyahu wants to prolong this war as long as he can, even at the expense of sacrificing the hostages, because Netanyahu's political survival is based on continuing this war. As long as the war goes on, we don't head for new elections. As long as the war goes on, we don't create an independent judicial commission of inquiry of what brought us to October 7th, what happened on October 7th, and the dysfunctional nature of the Israeli government since October 7th. We have a built-in mechanism in Israel that prolongs the war. Now we have Donald Trump come along with his insane ideas of ethnic cleansing of Gaza and believing that he can force Jordan and Egypt to take in 2 million Palestinians. This is not real. This cannot happen. This will not happen. These are not pieces on a chessboard. These are people who are connected to a land, a heritage, a homeland, and they will not be moved. Even if there are Gazans who may want to leave Gaza, no one agrees to voluntarily leave their homeland. And the people of Palestine will not voluntarily agree to leave their homeland. Even if the people of Gaza are living homeless today, 2 million people who have no homes to go back to because they were destroyed, are willing to remain in Palestine and fight for their right to be in Palestine, and will never give in to the will of Donald Trump, and no money in the world will buy their allegiance and willingness to leave their homeland. So where are we today? It's very clear that there are two things that came out of this war so far that put us on a possible course toward changing our reality for the positive. For one, and you might not agree with me that this is a positive thing, but I think it is, the two-state solution is back on the table. For years before the war, I thought that the two-state solution was no longer viable. But it's back on the table. And many people don't know this, but at the General Assembly last September, the Saudis, together with Norway, the European Union, and France, created a global alliance for the implementation of the two-state solution. They have subsequently held meetings in Riyadh, in Brussels, in Oslo, and the next meeting is in Cairo this month. And there are 90 countries that are taking part in this global alliance for the implementation of the two-state solution. I think this is a really positive development. Of course, Israel is invited and Israel doesn't come. I have told the organizers that they need to make sure that there is a chair at the table with the sign Israel and an empty seat so that everyone knows that Israel is invited and they don't attend. This is a meeting which is aimed at getting countries like Germany to recognize their historic responsibility to recognize the state of Palestine. Isn't it about time? The Palestinian people are also victims of the Holocaust. Let's not forget that. But as my friend and colleague Samer says, even if 192 member states of the United Nations recognize the state of Palestine, that's not going to end the occupation. There is only one state's recognition of the state of Palestine that you need to end the occupation and allow Palestinians to live in freedom and dignity and security, and that's Israel. Samer, who speaks on all Israeli media, he learned Hebrew in prison. He went to prison when he was a 15-year-old kid for throwing stones during the first Intifada. Samer says, I speak to all you Israelis, from the right to the left. I'm on television, even on Channel 14, which makes Fox News look liberal. I don't go to Channel 14. Samer goes to Channel 14. Samer says, I know you Israelis better than you know yourselves because you don't talk to each other. I talk to all of you. And one thing that Samer says when he speaks to Israelis and to Palestinians is that we have a failed strategy. For 100 years, we Palestinians have had three leaders, Haj Aminu Husseini, Yasser Arafat, and Mahmoud Abbas. And all three of them have failed in their responsibility to their people to bring them to freedom, liberation, security, and dignity. All three leaders. And all three leaders have invested their time and energy in the same failed strategy. And here I think I'm going to take issue with Francesca, even though she's right. All the international pressure on the world will not change Israel's political position on the occupation. It doesn't work. The more you pressure Israel, the more hardline they become. The more you threaten Israel, the more you back them into a corner. As Samer says, and I think he's right, we Palestinians need to develop a strategy which understands that Israelis are not the enemy, they are the solution. What we need to do is address Israeli fear. Now, I know this sounds absurd asking the victims, the occupied, to understand the fear of the occupier. If we had international law working, Palestinians would not only be right and just in terms of their positions, they would also be smart. But because the international law and the international system doesn't work, it's not enough to be right. Yes, Palestinians have a right to resist. Palestinians have a right to an armed struggle against the occupier, not civilians, against the army. It's right. When a Palestinian kills an Israeli soldier in the occupied territories, it is not terrorism. Terrorism is the use of violence against civilians for achieving political goals. But it is not smart for the Palestinians to continue to support the armed struggle. It might be right, but it is not smart. It is a strategy that has failed them for 100 years. There is no military solution to this conflict, not from the Israeli side and not from the Palestinian side. There's no military solution. And the armed struggle only gets more Palestinians killed. There are no victors in this war in Gaza. I read the Hamas Telegram pages and the Islamic Jihad Telegram pages. They put out these lofty statements in beautiful Arabic every single day in which they claim victory. Show me the victory. There are only losers in this war. There is no total victory that Netanyahu talks about and lies about. And Hamas has brought death and destruction on the Palestinian people. And we all need to say, we Israelis and Palestinians need to all say, enough. It has to end. Even when this war is over, there will remain 7 million Israeli Jews and 7 million Palestinian Arabs living on the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. That fact is not going to change. We are almost equal numbers. There are a little few more Palestinians than there are Israeli Jews. Unfortunately, there is no one-state solution. It doesn't exist. And if anyone thinks that after October 7th, the idea of just putting everyone together in one happy state is the solution, then you're living in fantasy world. But the solution is also not a two-state solution which puts people in cages. There is no peace between Israel and Palestine which is based on walls and fences that prevent people from moving, because all the land between the river and the sea, all of Palestine, and all the land between the river and the sea, Eretz Israel, is important to all the Israelis and all the Palestinians who live there. I can tell you as a Jew, when we read the Torah, the stories that we are told in the Torah don't take place on the beaches of Tel Aviv. They take place in the hilltops and the valleys of Judea and Samaria. And when Palestinians who are living in Nablus, Tulkarm, Kalkilia, or Khalil think about Palestine, they're not just thinking about Ramallah and Khalil, they're thinking about Jaffa and Lid and Haifa and Akka. So how do we make this possible, where we understand that this is a shared homeland, where both people must have the right for self-determination? There's no other solution. We have been killing each other, willing to fight and die for more than 100 years, for a territorial expression of our identity. We both claim that this land belongs to us. We both claim that we give our identity to this land, and we take our identity from this land. If you ever want to read two short mirror documents, read the Israeli Declaration of Independence and the Palestinian Declaration of Independence. The Israeli Declaration of Independence was authored mainly by Israel's first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion. The Palestinian Declaration of Independence from November 15, 1988, was mostly authored by the Palestinian national poet Mahmoud Darwish. When you read these two documents, they are mirror images of each other. They each spell out, paragraph by paragraph, why each people claim the right to the land and the right to self-determination, the right to establish their state on the land. They both recognize that there are other people living in the land. Samer, when he speaks to Jews, he says, I'm a Muslim. I know my history. I cannot deny that the Jews were in the land of Israel. They have a connection to that land. But I want to remind you, Jews, you were never there alone. There were always others. And we're the others. This is the reality of the land. Rashid Khalidi, the professor from Columbia University, in his last book, The 100-Year War on Palestine, says it very eloquently. Rashid wrote, I, as a Palestinian, can never justify Zionism. I can never say that it was right, and I will never agree that Zionism had a legal or even a moral reason for existing. But I'm a realist. There are 7 million Israeli Jews in the land today. You want me to go on fighting against Zionism from 150 years ago? The reality is that there are two people living in this land, whether you like it or not. The only way we're going to stop killing each other is when we understand that every single person living between the river and the sea must have the same right to the same rights. That is the fundamental principle that will enable us to live in peace. Now let's deal once again with reality. There is no chance of peace with our current leadership. Zero chance. Not only that, in my estimation, 30% of Israeli Jews will say no to any peace treaty that's on the table, regardless of what it says. 30%, up to 30%. Up to 30% of Palestinians will say no to any peace treaty that's put on the table. That's the real picture. But the flip side of that is that there is a potential of 70% of Israeli Jews and 70% of Palestinian Arabs who could say yes. Where is our challenge? Our challenge is, first of all, we have a 30-year failed peace process. Promises that people believed would bring us peace and didn't. They brought us more suffering and more tragedy. But moreover, at least since the Second Intifada, at least since the year 2000, when I lecture to groups of young Israelis and young Palestinians or older people on both sides, I hear the same words from both peoples. They tell me, I want peace, but they don't. And I hear this from Israelis, and I hear it from Palestinians almost every day. And my answer to them is, you're right. The objective reality that we live verifies for Israelis and Palestinians that the other side doesn't want peace, whether it be Israelis who are stealing more Palestinian lands and confiscating Palestinian land and building more settlements and settler violence and the army protecting them and Israeli impunity, or whether it be Israelis who see Palestinians committing acts of terror and being celebrated in cities and towns throughout the occupied territories. We get verification every single day that the other side doesn't want peace, and we have 0 leaders who even use the word peace. It's become a 4-letter word. We don't talk about it. In my mind, the key to breaking this cycle is to demonstrate partnership. It's when Israelis and Palestinians are willing to stand up together and say, I want to live in peace. I recognize your right as a people for your national right of self-determination. I recognize your right to have a decent life, to live in security, security in the broad sense, not just weapons, but to live in security, human security, of having shelter, of having food, of having a job. I recognize your rights for good education. When we can develop partnerships like this and focus them in the eyes of the public, we will begin to make a shift. We started to do that. I'm going to tell you a secret story that hasn't been published. Keep it secret. About 2.5 years ago, I approached former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert. Ehud Olmert, in 2008, when he was Prime Minister, held 42 negotiating meetings with Mahmoud Abbas. He raised a Palestinian flag along an Israeli flag on the Prime Minister's residence in Jerusalem. He sent a motorcade to bring Mahmoud Abbas from Ramallah to Jerusalem, just like he was a head of state. And Olmert went further in his negotiations with Abbas than any other Israeli leader before him. But he didn't get to finish those negotiations because he got indicted and he was sent to jail on a minor corruption fee, and he served his time in prison. But I know that Olmert, who, by the way, when he was mayor of Jerusalem, he was mayor of Jerusalem for 10 years. When he used to appear in the Jerusalem theater before some event, my wife and I would scream boo at him. There wasn't anything that I agreed with him on, but this is a changed man. And I approached him 2.5 years ago and I said, Ehud, are you willing to try and close the gaps that existed between you and Mahmoud Abbas back in 2008? And on the spot, he said yes. I said to him, in my mind, you're not in power. Mahmoud Abbas has almost 0 legitimacy, but what we're going to do is create a document, if they agree, that has historical purpose. It will be a benchmark when negotiations begin. It will change the narrative, that's the common narrative in Israel and around the world, that once again the Israelis offered everything to the Palestinians and they said no. Olmert says openly, Mahmoud Abbas never said no. He never said yes. It took me 3 months to convince Mahmoud Abbas to enter into the process, and he did. And he sent 2 representatives to negotiate with Olmert in his office in Tel Aviv. And in September 2023, they arrived in an agreement, and Abbas was in Amman in his house in Jordan, and 10 minutes before Olmert and I boarded the plane to fly to Amman to sign this document, I received a phone call from him, not from him, from his office, saying, don't come. Why? We didn't coordinate Olmert's visit with the Jordanians. Olmert travels with security, state-provided security. His security folks coordinated the visit with the Jordanians. The next day, Abbas said to me, tell Olmert to come to Ramallah to talk about the document. Olmert's response was, I'm not coming to talk about the document. We already did that. We have an agreed a document. I'm coming to Ramallah to sign the document. And then October 7th happened. And even after October 7th, Ehud Olmert said, I'm willing to go to Ramallah to sign the document. And Abbas kept saying, tell him to come to Ramallah to talk about the document. I have a historic document in my hands, an agreement on a 2-state solution, on borders, on Jerusalem, on refugees, on security, on economy, on water, everything. And once again, Abbas wouldn't sign it. So I sat with Samer in his house in Sheikh Jarrah and said, what do we do with this document? Samer suggested, let's call Nasser al-Qidwa. Many of you probably don't know the name of Nasser al-Qidwa. Nasser was the PLO ambassador in the United Nations for 17 years. He also served for a period of time as Deputy Secretary General of the UN. He was a foreign minister in one of Mahmoud Abbas's governments. He was the president of the Yasser Arafat Foundation. He is the nephew of Yasser Arafat. Nasser's mother is Arafat's sister. Nasser put together a political list that aimed to run in the elections in May of 2021 that Mahmoud Abbas canceled. The list that Nasser al-Kidwa headed was a list of Fatah people who were opposed to Abbas. And it was supported by Marwan Barouti. Marwan's wife Fadwa was number 2 on Nasser's list. We're talking about a person with legitimacy. We're talking about a person who's known in the Palestinian world. We're talking about a person who believes in peace and nonviolence and believes in the two-state solution. When we called Nasser, his first response was, I won't sign a document that Abbas wouldn't sign. So what then? I suggested to Nasser, you write a document. And he did. And we used Nasser's document to negotiate with Olmert. These two men had never met each other. Former Foreign Minister of Palestine, former Prime Minister of Israel. We brought them together in negotiations over Zoom. It took 2 months for us to agree on a paper. What Nasser said is, this is not an agreement. It's not a peace plan. It's a paper, a document of a proposal of how to end the war in Gaza, how to create credible governance in Gaza until Palestinians can go to elections, how to free the hostages and an agreed upon list and names of Palestinian prisoners, the two-state solution based on the 1967 borders with a 4.4 territorial swap of equal size from each territory. And with regard to Jerusalem, that all the Palestinian neighborhoods in Jerusalem would be the capital of Palestine, all the Jewish neighborhoods in Jerusalem would be the capital of Israel, and the old city of Jerusalem, which is less than 1 square kilometer, would be put under international guardianship of 5 countries, of which Israel and Palestine would be 2. Internationalizing the holy places and the old city of Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is bigger than Israel and Palestine, even though it's 1 square kilometer. This proposal we had was signed in July of 2024, and then we thought, what do we do with it? If we present it immediately to the Israeli and Palestinian publics, they won't relate to it. They'll say, these two guys, who are they? Former prime minister, went to prison. Former foreign minister who's living in exile. He was thrown out of Palestine by Abbas. What kind of legitimacy do these people have? Without looking at the content of the document. So we made a decision that we're going to present it around the world. And in 4 months, we met with 39 heads of state and foreign ministers, including in the region and in Europe. We drafted together a joint op-ed newspaper piece, translated into 15 languages, appeared in 33 of the leading newspapers of the world. This past week, we held our first Israeli-Palestinian gathering on the Olmert al-Kidwa paper, attended by 50 Israelis and 50 Palestinians in Cyprus, including people from Gaza who are not in Gaza now. It was an amazing meeting. I have in my career organized more than 2,000 Israeli-Palestinian conferences. This was one of the best Israeli-Palestinian meetings I've ever been to. At a time that you would expect to be so much mutual recrimination and hate and wants of revenge, we had 100 Israelis and Palestinians in a very intensive meeting talking to each other of how do we get out of this cycle that we're in? How do we move forward? How do we make the vision of Olmert and al-Kidwa real? And the key to it is demonstrating this partnership. I hope that this past days, what we did is created 50 pairs of Israelis and Palestinians who are now willing to work together, to go out together, to speak together, to write together, to put on social media that they are working together for peace. I'm often called Francesca told me I'm often called a normalizer. I have no idea what that means because I've spent every day of my life working against the occupation and never normalizing the occupation. And all those people who talk about normalization when Israelis and Palestinians are working to end the occupation and create a Palestinian state are calling normalizers. We need to change the language. We need to change our ideas. We need now, and with this I'll conclude, we need now, us, Israelis and Palestinians, to get rid of our leaders. This is number one issue on our agenda. Netanyahu is a criminal not only for what he's done in Gaza and in the West Bank. Netanyahu is a criminal against the Israeli people. I can tell you that after I successfully back-channeled negotiations that I started in 2006 with Hamas that led to the breakthrough that freed Gilad Shalit and 1,027 Palestinian prisoners, I used my credibility to talk to Abbas and Netanyahu about opening up a secret direct channel between them. And in 2012 and 2013, 3 times I brought offers from Mahmoud Abbas to negotiate in secret direct channels with Netanyahu, and Netanyahu said no. October 7th needs to be a wake-up call to the Israeli people that you cannot occupy another people for 56 years or lock 2.3 million people in a territory like Gaza with 80% poverty and expect to have quiet. There's no peace with occupation. There's no quiet with siege. This the Israeli people need to understand, and they need to know that Benjamin Netanyahu, since at least 2009, has developed a strategy to hold and divide the Palestinian leadership, to strengthen Hamas, to weaken the Palestinian Authority and to delegitimize them. And Netanyahu succeeded in letting the whole world believe that he wants peace because he made one speech in 2009 talking about a 2-state solution at Bar-Ilan University. By the way, his father, Ben-Zion Netanyahu, was interviewed the following day on Israeli army radio, at which time he said, "I know my son, he didn't mean it." And of course he didn't. Netanyahu's strategy worked. It removed the issue of Palestine from the local agenda. We had 5 rounds of elections in Israel. No one talked about the single most crucial issue to the future of Jerusalem, the occupation and the Palestinian people. Didn't even mention it. And it was removed from the international agenda. Who talked about Palestine? Netanyahu has to go. Now, I don't have any great hopes of some new leader emerging in Israel. There is no one in our political arena who I think is the person who should lead us and can lead us to peace. But you know, before this war, we had 40 weeks of demonstrations against the judicial overthrow of our government by Netanyahu's government. And in 40 weeks of demonstrations of hundreds of thousands of people, a whole new young leadership of civil society emerged. And on October 7th, when we had a dysfunctional government for months, it was the same civil society that enlisted itself and provided basic needs for human beings who were suffering as a result of October 7th. We have all kinds of new young leaders out there. Some of them we don't even know who they are, but they will emerge. We may get at some kind of interim leadership for a period of time who will be better than Netanyahu, but not what we need. Mahmoud Abbas is 90 years old, in the 19th year of a 4-year term of office, and enjoys 0 legitimacy amongst the Palestinian people. There's no question that the Palestinian people need the right to elect their new leaders. But the reality on the ground now is that elections are not really possible, not when Gaza is in ruins and 2 million people are homeless and what's going on in the West Bank. We believe that Mahmoud Abbas is the only legal reference point for appointing someone to govern. But Mahmoud Abbas has consolidated power of the executive branch, the legislative branch, which he canceled, the judicial branch, which doesn't exist because he appointed all the judges. He controls all the money and all the weapons. So there's no democracy in Palestine. There needs to be a legitimate person governing Palestine. Palestinian friends say to me, let Mahmoud Abbas be president for life. Let him have immunity. No one will touch him. No one will touch his money. No one will touch his sons, but he has to transfer power. The only way that's going to happen is if the United States, Jordan, and Egypt, and maybe a few of the other countries tell Mahmoud Abbas that that's what he needs to do, because that's what he needs to do. Nasser Kidwa was asked in the European Union, yes, Nasser Kidwa was asked in Brussels, with the 27 countries representative, if he were appointed by Abbas, would he take the job of governing Gaza for a limited period of time? And he said, you have to be crazy to want to go back to Gaza, but I'm a Palestinian leader, and I am a responsible person, and I will not avoid my responsibility. I think that he is, it's not my job to appoint him, but I think he is probably the most credible person, from my personal point of view of knowing him personally, the best person possible to form a new government in Gaza that would lead for a period of 24 to 36 months before Palestinians could have elections, that would have the credibility to negotiate Hamas, either those people who want to leave Gaza would leave, or those who don't could be integrated into a newly formed Palestinian security force that could also invite a temporary presence to come to Gaza from Jordan, from Egypt, from Saudi Arabia, from the Emirates, from any other country, that would not only serve the function that Israel wants of preventing an attack against Israel from Gaza, but would also serve as a buffer to make sure that Israel never attacks Gaza again as well. There are concrete positions, ideas, and proposals that are on the table. They're our responsibility. We need your help. And if you could enforce international law, that would be very welcome. If you could convince your government to recognize the state of Palestine, that would be helpful. All the member states of the United Nations need to recognize Palestine. Any country that talks about a two-state solution and only recognize one of those states needs to shut up or put up. So with that, one word, if I could, just about the ceasefire, and then really I'll shut up. The deal that was agreed to by Israel and Hamas about 30 days ago was a bad deal. When President Biden presented it in May, I said it was a bad deal. Any deal that takes months to implement has no guarantees that the war won't restart, that has 1 million exit points from the agreement every single day and doesn't achieve the end result of freeing the hostages and ending the war is a bad deal. In September, on behalf of families of hostages, I negotiated with Hamas and arrived at an agreement that they put in writing in English and in Arabic, supported, according to what I was told, by the whole Hamas leadership, that in 3 weeks would have ended the war, would have brought an Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, would have released all the Israeli hostages, and agreed to number and list of Palestinian prisoners. And not only that, Hamas added to this agreement in writing and a voice message that they agreed to turn over the governance of Gaza to a civilian, professional, technocratic government. When I transmitted this to the Israeli negotiators, the response I got was, the Prime Minister doesn't want to end the war. When I transmitted it to the Qataris and the Egyptians, they told me, if Hamas brings it to us, we'll deal with it. When I said, Hamas, bring it to the Qataris and the Egyptians, they responded stupidly that that would weaken our position in negotiations. Thinking that President Biden might be interested in a legacy of the president who ended the war in Gaza, rather than being the Gaza war president, or Genocide Joe, as some people call him, I thought that maybe the President of the United States would pick up this deal. And it was transmitted to him. And it got to the head of the CIA and to his chief of staff, Brett McGurk, who was involved in the negotiations. And I met with 2 of the Israeli negotiators in Tel Aviv who told me, it's hopeless. The White House is too invested in the bad agreement that they were negotiating for months. This war could have ended in September. This war could have ended after 1 month if the President of the United States wanted it to end. They wanted it to go on, and it's still going on, and it's not ended yet. Will phase 1 complete itself? Probably. There's a good chance that both sides want to bring this to the end of phase 1. Will we get to phase 2? It seems to me at this moment very unlikely. Israel is preparing itself to renew the war. The Hamas leadership outside is losing control of Gaza inside, and there not be a break there that the people outside may not be able to negotiate for inside. We don't know. It does not look good. That's also part of our reality, and this war must end. So I agree with everyone who said here today that we need to stop fueling the war. This war has been fueled for too long by countries around the world that are enabling Israel to continue battling this war that cannot be won. There is no military victory over Hamas. There is only a political victory over Hamas, and that victory is when the Palestinian people know that they will get dignity, independence, freedom, and security. And let it be 100% clear, Israel, which has freedom and independence and maybe dignity, will never have security if the Palestinians don't have freedom, independence, dignity, and security. It's a two-way street here. There are no winners unless we reach a peace agreement between us. That is the only victory in Israel and Palestine which is achievable. Thank you very much.